Jonathan.
I hugely applaud the campaign you're part of to change the uncritical acceptance of often very crude and very dangerous religious beliefs in the United States. And I've always been a bit puzzled how it can be that a society which is so leading intellectually in some things like science and philosophy can also have this extraordinary tale of feeble thinking. But while I'm hugely on your side, I want to express a bit of disagreement with your take on 9/11.
Sure.
Because, well, in a way, I'm glad you had the take on 9/11 you did, because it led you to write these books. But I have a rather different take on it. You're struck by the fact that it was people who believed they were doing what the Prophet told them to do. I'm struck by the fact that lots and lots of people who believe in doing what the Prophet says and believe in that religion weren't in favour of this kind of terrorism. And if one looks at the actual things said, the statements made by bin Laden, it seems to me that while religion is undoubtedly part of the thing in the background, the deep sense of humiliation that many Islamic people feel because of things like American military presence in the Middle East, in places they regard as sacred, seems to me of much greater importance in understanding why they did what they did. And I see it as rather parallel to the way in which George Bush's foolish military adventures in response to it, sadly backed up by my former Prime Minister, these also seem to me, if you look at George Bush standing on the site of the Twin Towers after the wreckage, it seems to me that he's articulating a sense of humiliation that characteristically leads people to want to hit back. Now, after the much smaller episode in London, when about 50 people were killed in the bombing of the London Underground and the London bus system by Islamic suicide bombers, I was shocked to find there was a public opinion poll in one of the British newspapers that showed that about a third of British Islamic people thought that Western civilization was decadent and should be brought to an end.
Right.
Now that's about 500,000 people. Now, my response was to write an article in The Guardian saying, a society where people are so deeply divided to this degree, we should start talking to each other, and we need a kind of Socratic dialogue between Western values and Islamic values. And I got a lot of denunciation from crackpots in the United States who felt that I was like Neville Chamberlain, being willing to talk to the enemy. But I also got a response from an Islamic imam of a London mosque, and we had a debate together. And we discussed what it was that we Westerners worry about or offended by in Islam. I talked about the position of gays, the position of women. He talked about what he saw as moral decadence of various kinds, the toleration of crime. But the sense I came away with, we didn't reach agreement, but the sense I came away with was that to try to attack terrorism, try to undermine terrorism by undermining the whole system of religious beliefs is an incredibly long, slow strategy. I applaud you for taking part in that. But as a response to terrorism, it seems to be much less effective than discussing what values we share, how we can live together, and trying to understand and criticize each other, but not going quite so deep as you want to go.
Right. Well, it's a good question and very eloquently put. I think that it's not incompatible with my approach or how I view this. Clearly there are, I just imagine, concentric circles of religious infatuation. And in the center, we have people who are really, really down to their toes committed to their religious principles. And these religious principles actually are different as you move from religion to religion. I mean, as I've said before, no matter how fanatical someone becomes as a Jain, the core principle of which is nonviolence, they're not going to fly an airplane into a building over their humiliation or grievances, because it would be a repudiation of everything that they've organized their life around. And so it matters that at the core of Islam there are principles like martyrdom and jihad. It really matters that Islam views itself as a religion that will be victorious in this world, politically and materially. I mean, that there will be a true Islamification of the planet. That people will either convert or die, or Christians and Jews will live as called dhimmi, as in some kind of apartheid situation where they pay a protection tax. This is the view of moral order that you get from Islam, and it really is. It's not the crazy Al Qaeda, I just went to a training camp in Afghanistan Islam. It is mainstream Islam. And one of the problems we have is that many Muslims, for understandable reasons and some for really deplorable reasons, are playing hide the ball with the articles of faith and are eager to have the conversations of the sort you have had from a very cynical and manipulative perspective. We're just going to keep having big families, and eventually it's going to be Arabia, and the war will be won. There are people who really think in those terms, and they're not necessarily just the people in the center of the bullseye of Islamic infatuation. They can be several cantos out. Just the kind of people who would never blow themselves up, but who think it's a good thing that some people will. And they don't really care if they blow up non-combatants. And they view Danish cartoonists drawing images of the Prophet as a moral offense equivalent to dropping bombs on people or flying planes into buildings. And these are theological grievances. And much of the humiliation you talk about, which I think is worth worrying about, much of this humiliation is mediated by theological claims and beliefs and priorities, and certainly everything bin Laden was ranting about prior to 9/11 is best seen as a theological concern. I mean, he was concerned about the proximity of infidel troops to Muslim holy sites. He's concerned about the caliphate. He's concerned about apostate, bad Muslim rulers in Saudi Arabia and other countries, insufficiently devout rulers. He's not only as a political opportunist has he become concerned about the fate of the Palestinians, and obviously he hates the Jews and he hates the existence of Israel. But these are all, through all of this, I mean, it can be sort of bent into the language of humiliation and equal rights and a repudiation of colonialism, and it's entangled with our energy policies. And yes, I mean, there's a lot that we should get straight. But we have to realize that there is a subset of the Muslim world that takes the idea of conquering the world for Islam very, very seriously. And we deny that at our peril. And it is different than Buddhists who we might mistreat. The Buddhists are being mistreated by the Chinese in Tibet. Buddhism doesn't have. It's possible to get Buddhist violence, and we had Buddhist violence in World War II. I mean, Zen Buddhism was very flexible in helping to inspire the kamikaze pilots. It was kind of a Zen Shinto national war ethic, but it's harder to bend Tibetan Buddhism into a death cult. And we don't have Tibetan Buddhist suicide bombers blowing themselves up on Chinese buses. It wouldn't be impossible, but it's much less likely, and it's less likely because of what they believe. So my argument is beliefs matter, and let's talk honestly about the logical consequences of beliefs.